Hey, everybody, this is People of Substance by Lemon Skies. Excited to bring you another episode and to have a conversation with David Rhode. David is an author, a professor, a marketer, hails from for-profit space, eventually making his way to our nonprofit sector. So really thrilled to introduce you and excited to have this conversation, David.
I'm excited too, Olga. Let's get going.
Yeah, well, let's get started. So you started your professional journey in for-profit space, I believe at Procter and Gamble, which is kind of the branding machine. So can you talk a little bit about making your way to nonprofit sector and what you've carried away from your early days?
Yeah, I had what I thought was a normal start to my professional career. I was, going to have a corporate job, and I was fortunate enough to start my career at Procter and Gamble, as you indicated, and really had the benefit of the disciplined thinking and the research sort of mindset that they brought to things. I learned a lot about how to write and write clearly when I was there. And then after a few years, I transitioned out of the corporate space. I ended up going to work in a family business, and then led that business myself for 12 years, and then sold the business. And then I was at a point in my life where I kind of really had a reflection, and I just thought I wanted to do something a little bit more meaningful. And for me, that meant getting putting both feet in with the nonprofit sector. And as somebody who wasn't afraid to start their own stuff, I created an organization that I thought might have some meaning, and was able, unfortunate enough, to lead that for 15 years, scaled it, and had a great time. So that's sort of the high level sense for how my career trajectory and what brought me into the nonprofit sector.
So let's go back to the early days at Procter and Gamble. First of all, I'm dying to know which brands you worked on. Was it Crest? Was it, so let's just start there for a second.
So I was in consumer. I was in the packaged soap and detergent. I was on the Tide brand, then the Dawn brand, and then I was brand manager for Era liquid laundry detergent. And so during my 4 years or so at Procter and Gamble, those were the three brands that I was on. Each with very different experiences, although the first two are huge market share leaders in their respective categories.
Yeah, I feel very strongly about laundry, so we can discuss that separately.
All day. I love laundry.
Yeah. So can you kind of talk a little bit about what's the same about branding and what's a little bit different when you go from Tide detergent, aside from multi-million dollar budget, to nonprofit causes, and how organizations brand themselves and brand the work they're doing?
There are major differences. And so, at a structural level, the biggest difference, just as you alluded, was, we were sitting atop of a $1 billion business, and we controlled the messaging centrally. We had, national media. We had all of the things that you would if you had the resources to do those things in that manner. So you had a very clear position. You understood how the consumer viewed you. You understood what the consumer wanted from your product, and you just hammered away at that. For Tide, it was, cleaning. For Dawn, it was grease removal. And we were very much, it was very eager for us to kind of stay very clear on those. Those were winning platforms to be on. In the nonprofit sector, 92% of the nonprofits have a budget of $1 million or less, and probably over 99% of those organizations aren't spending anything on marketing. They just don't have the budget to do that. They're really just trying to deliver their programs, pay their staff, et cetera. So they're in a very different position in terms of how to get their message out there. They have to rely so much more on social media, so much more on people to carry that message forward. Those people are staff members, those people are board members, volunteers, and even the folks that are benefiting from those programs. They are the ones that are sort of carrying the message forward. And it's a much more decentralized approach. Other people are telling your story, and you have to arm them with the right information so that they tell the right story. And so it's a very different relationship.
I mean, it sounds actually more complex in face value, that
Much
decentralization.
more complex. It's a lot easier to just spend money and have an agent and produce great commercials and just control when that message is going out, on what channels, at what times, to which audiences. In the nonprofit world, you really are relying on these individual interactions, and they can go in any number of directions. And so, there's a lot more variance there and a lot more chance for things to be organic, but also more opportunities for things to kind of go sideways if you're not careful.
So what is the relationship, and that's a conversation I've had with others that I find very interesting, between the brand and fundraising that organization does, which is really equivalent to sales, right? For us, that is equivalent to sales.
There's a strong connection between brand and fundraising. People at the fundamental level, branding is about differentiation, how people view you, how people categorize your product or service in their mind. And in the nonprofit space, that's very much that carries forward, which is, how do they think of you in terms of solving a problem? Does that problem matter to them? Are you the best ones to solve that problem? What is the stories? What is the proof behind your organization that says you're the right organization to be, for them to put their money behind, for you to go solve that problem in an effective way? And so all of those things, the storytelling, the proof, that differentiation, how people perceive your organization, that is the essence of branding right there. And so once a potential donor has a clear understanding of who you are, then they can consider making a donation. And so there's a whole journey that donors take, but they become aware of you, they understand you, they consider you, and then at some point they make a decision to put some money behind the work that you're doing. But it all starts with branding in my mind. I'm biased because I look at the world in sort of a branding lens, but that how they understand you really shapes the beginning of that interaction with the organization.
Yeah. So I guess my question too, and the major nonprofits aside, let's set aside those, kind of the blue chip entities that have been around. What can smaller nonprofits do? You mentioned the $1 million budget or less, which is inclusive of staff, and it's inclusive of expenses, programmatic work, et cetera. What can smaller organizations do to differentiate themselves?
Small organizations have to rely on several things. One is, as I said, they really have to get their message down. They have to get their message clear, and they rely on those sort of brand ambassadors that every organization has: staff, volunteers, board members, donors, to carry that message forward. So they have to be effective and clear. And a big word in branding is consistency. So when you are bringing your message forward, you're always talking about the same things over and over and over again, because people are busy. They're bombarded by messages from all directions. How are they going to understand the work that your organization is doing? They're going to understand it because you've told them over and over and over again, maybe in slightly different ways, but always around a central theme, always around core messages. So, our job, big brand or small brand, big nonprofit, small nonprofit, is really to be consistent, to be authentic, to make sure our messages are clear over time, so that we're not running in this direction and running in that direction where people are having a hard time understanding kind of who we are and what we do. We really need to be consistent over time.
Yeah. So I'd like to shift gears for a second, or for a few minutes. I appreciate the insights on the brand. And where obviously you're the right person to ask, because outside of the work you're doing, you also happen to be a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. And maybe you can talk a little bit about the courses you're teaching.
I teach 2 classes at Penn, and it's fun and exciting. And I like the interaction from sort of a putting yourself out there in that way is always a challenge. You know that there's going to be some really interesting questions. You need to be on your toes and stay on your game. I teach 2 classes. One is nonprofit branding, and so very similar to a lot of the things we've talked about. And then I teach a social impact consulting course where I have MBA students who are very much interested in learning more about the nonprofit sector. We talk about the nonprofit sector both in the classroom, and then I set them up in teams to work with nonprofits on a particular challenge they are facing. So it's on the branding side. I have one class which is really kind of focused around that, and the other side is more consulting, which is strategy and a range of challenges that nonprofits are facing.
Yeah, and I knew that about you. So the questions I was peppering you with about the brand, obviously, were not completely guesswork here.
Not at all.
So what types of students do you typically find in your classes? Are they on nonprofit track, or is this an additional thing they take on as part of their education?
So the nonprofit branding classes within the School of Social Policy and Practice, those are graduate students that are in a nonprofit leadership program. So they're hoping to become more consumed with and surrounded by the nonprofit sector. Some of them already have experience in the sector. Some of them have started their own organizations. Others have ideas about what that could look and feel like. In other situations, they've just been volunteers with organizations, but they're very much interested in that, and they've already sort of committed and put their chips in behind themselves to say, I want to invest in my own self to get this degree and then move forward with my career in that way. For the MBA students, a surprising number of them have deep nonprofit experience. They have been on boards. Some of them are founders. Many of them really have a much deeper knowledge of the nonprofit sector than I was aware of. These are MBAs that are executives that are going back for their MBA at the same time. So they're a little further along in their career. And so having that deeper experience is not a huge surprise, but I kind of thought I'd be teaching them a lot about the nonprofit sector, and there's a very good exchange. I continue to learn from them as well.
Can you share some examples of what you didn't expect to walk away with?
Well, I mean, just the level of commitment to the work. They are, the MBAs in particular it was a virtual class. There were students from around the world. So I had students that were phoning in from 2 a.m, from 8 or 9 a.m. Others was late at night. There was that side of it, just the way they connected with the CEOs of the organizations and their level of interest. This was not just a casual consulting engagement. They became so connected to the work, and that just elevated the class, seeing like how they were approaching the problems and the kind of the sincerity with which they wanted to help lift these organizations up. So those are the kind of things they're very interested around. Board service, what the board's responsibility is. They're very interesting in sort of the future of fundraising and how to be successful in that way, and really not being as reliant on traditional fundraising, maybe looking more at earned income and other things so that the organization can be less reliant on some of those variability that we're seeing from a philanthropic standpoint these days.
What are some really cool, innovative things that you're hearing about in your classrooms?
Well, they're very interested in technology. They're very interested in how AI is intersecting with the workplace in general. So those are areas where they're bringing a lot more solutions to the classroom and experience from their own work environments than is deeper experience than I have with some of those things. So I would say on those 2 fronts, that's where the most the new ideas are coming from, and those kind of things that we're all discovering and learning together. 1 or 2 somebody will raise a question in class, and then a number of people will chime in with how they will address this or how they might consider addressing this based on their work experience. And a lot of it involves technology.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I will point out that we're about 15 minutes into this discussion, and that's the first time artificial intelligence came up. So that's actually remarkable. Usually it happens a lot sooner. So let me, so away from AI for a second and to kind of talk a little bit about relationships. I'll ask you in a second about the book that you've written, which I think one of the topics you do talk about. But what do relationships in fundraising space mean to you, and where do you see um, technology sort of giving us more tools and helping us, and where do you feel like there could be risks of deteriorating?
Well, so the fundamental relationship that I see in fundraising is one of trust. And so to me, that's sort of the antithesis of what we're looking at from a technology perspective. Mm-hmm. Trust is only gathered and garnered when we are in front of people, when they get to know us, when they understand what we're all about and how we're leading the organization, where the organization is headed, how they as a donor can fit in, the impact that their gifts are making on the work that we're doing, and that level of appreciation, that stewardship that all has to come from a really personal place, in my view. So I think that, and there's the old cliche, people give to people, not to organizations. And when they say they give to people, how do they feel about the person? Do they trust that person to do what they're giving them their money? They're saying, here, we know that you're going to do this good work. Go do more of it. And so I think that is the essence of the relationship in any fundraising situation is trust. So that's where I think that sort of is centered. And that's why I don't necessarily think, I mean, certainly technology can help us identify people with the greater propensity to give or likelihood to give based on previous, history of giving to an organization. And they can maybe point us in the direction of the people that we should be having those conversations with. That's fine. And there's tools out there. I'm really very curious about Molly Erickson's technology with Practivated and how she's using that and enabling people to sort of practice these conversations that they're having with prospective donors, because a lot of times we don't get to practice this stuff. We're sort of in the moment, and how are we going to do? And it'd be nice if we could just kind of work out the kinks of what we think we're going to say or how we're going to react to a particular question without the pressure of thinking in the moment. Not everybody is good at being in the moment. It's something that I feel more comfortable with than many people, but a lot of people are really uncomfortable unless they can kind of control all of the stuff. And being in a donor conversation normally doesn't go to script. There are lots of zigs and zags in that conversation. And I think what I've learned, and this is maybe where the trust comes in also, is that I don't need to feel all the pressure to have all the answers anymore. In the best donor conversations or the best conversations with anybody, I'm asking the questions and then I'm just listening, and I'm listening really carefully. And I want them to talk about their motivations and what matters to them, how they got involved, what they like about our work and things of that nature. And once I get to understand them, I can bring them opportunities that are going to fit their eye. And so it becomes more matchmaking than selling, because I don't really like the idea of selling, because I think that's where we kind of build up all of this anxiety and discomfort. But if it's really just helping make a connection between what they care about and what we're doing, it doesn't feel as pressure packed and it feels more natural. And I think that's where I've evolved as a fundraiser, and that's how I coach people to do more fundraising, is to really just think about the questions they want to ask, and then they'll feel more comfortable and feel more organic to share how the person can then get involved once they understand them better.
So it's more of an exercise in alignment.
It is. It should be. It's really understanding what they care about and what we do, and then matching those things up as carefully as possible.
So, David, I want to ask you about the book that you released. I think it's been about 2 years. I think it was 2024. And the title is Passion is Not Enough, which is intriguing in and of itself. But I want to ask you about the book and the premise behind it, where you relied on interviewing a number of nonprofit professionals. So I want to talk to you about that.
Yeah, I mean, Passion Isn't Enough is a title that has really resonated with people. When they hear the name of the book, I get a lot of head nodding. And so that's a great start. And it really was an outgrowth of the coaching that I do with nonprofit CEOs. I was realizing that I was having the same conversations over and over and over again with people, regardless of geography, regardless of what part of the sector they were in, and to a certain degree, regardless of the budget size of the organization. So for me, the way the book is structured is trying to sort of scale those conversations so that more people could learn about the kind of ways that I think and others who are very experienced in the sector also think. And so the book is really broken down into key functional areas. The first is building your strategic plan, then building your board, then building your fundraising strategy, and goes on through 15 different aspects of nonprofit leadership, because the passion piece is fine. Passion is required to get involved in the sector. You care about making a difference in the world. That's natural. That normally is a focus on your programming. What's the intervention that your organization is going to have with the people that you're trying to help in whatever way you're trying to help them. Great. But for organizations to be sustainable and successful over time, they have to be run, in my view, more like a business. And that involves being really successful in a lot of different areas so that the organization can be sustainable and grow over time.
So you alluded to having the same conversations with executives. What are some pain points that are a common thread that's not unique, but tend to be, whether you're in the hunger group or animal rights or environment or political activism that you're seeing?
The big three from my experience are strategic planning, board engagement, and fundraising. So that's where 90% of the organizations that I talk to have a challenge in one or more of those areas. There are certainly other things that come up from time to time, but those three are sort of the three legs of the stool, as far as I'm concerned, and making sure organizations understand the value of strategic planning, how to go about it, what's the end result. Ultimately, the end result is focus. You want alignment between your board and your staff around these 3 or 4 things that you're going to try to work on deeply over the next few years to change the trajectory of the organization. And when you have that alignment, it allows you to sort of not get pulled off track so easily when somebody has a good idea in a board meeting or in some other situation. Board engagement's probably the most common area that I encounter in the work that I do. Getting boards to pay attention, to show up prepared, to fundraise when we need them to all of the things that we might expect of a board member. And invariably, what I find is that organizations don't do a great job of explaining what those expectations are up front. Mm-hmm. And therefore, when people get on a board, they're learning what's needed after they've joined, which is kind of the wrong sequence. They should be learning what those expectations are up front so that when they get on the board, there's no surprises. And then fundraising is really just about understanding what works for that particular organization. There's no one fundraising solution. Every organization is really different. And making sure that they have the infrastructure, the resources to be successful in whichever pieces of the fundraising puzzle they're looking to double or triple down on. So normally that's major gifts is where I think people have the biggest headspace. But those are the kinds of things that I see and hear the most.
So somebody listening to us, without knowing their unique, specific circumstances, what are some key things that what advice would you give somebody who's listening to us right now, who's a nonprofit professional, executive, leader?
Yeah, the things that I would encourage people to do are to begin to develop their own network. I found it helpful, and I strongly encourage others to find a few people that they could talk to on a regular basis. One of the key things that I've heard over and over again is that leading a nonprofit organization can be a lonely job. And so having all that weight on your own shoulders without people to talk to is not a really healthy environment. So I really want people to be aware of self-care and how to take care of themselves as they're trying to take care of the organization. So that's one of the strategies to do that. And then I think the other area that I would always tell people is, even though everyone looks to them as the person that's supposed to have all the answers, where we can become the most successful is, as I said earlier, is to begin to be better at asking questions. To when somebody brings up an important topic, you don't have to answer what maybe your answer could be. That's a really interesting question. Why did you ask that? Tell me a little bit more about what's behind that question. What are you concerned about? And then let them do the talking, let them do the talking. And then there might be a point where you go, here's my answer. Or there may be a point that says, I'm not sure of the answer, but now that I understand it well, let me get back to you. But I think, we too often feel like we have to do it all in these small organizations where there's 3, 4, 5 staff and everyone's looking at us all the time. And it's just not, it's not natural, or it's not reasonable for people to have to feel that kind of pressure. And so I think we need to look for ways to release some of that pressure. And that, I think that comes from good, open, honest conversation, asking thoughtful questions, and then having other people that you can lean on once in a while who can be a resource for you, so you can talk to these things without judgment, and maybe just get their perspective from what they've experienced.
That makes sense. Almost like a personal advisory board, if you will.
Yeah, it's something that's an unofficial, sort of yours outside of the organization that you can go to off the record. Yes.
So David, just to wrap up, we've talked a lot about your professional journey, about your teaching, about writing. Let me ask you this question. In your own personal life, what are some causes, issues that you are involved with or care about?
Great. I care about a number of things. I'm involved with a lot of organizations sort of at the level of coaching them, so I see into them deeply. I care about youth. I care about education. Education's been very important in my life. I think it's very important for others. So when I see an organization that's trying to make a difference in terms of education or inequities in education, that always gets my attention. I'm a dog lover, so it's going to be hard to get me off of an organization that's supporting taking good care of animals in some way, shape, or form. And I've always been a person that's very passionate about sports, and so seeing the benefits that sports-based youth development can have, those organizations also catch my eye. So those are some of the areas. But I mean, I'm more agnostic than that. What attracts me to an organization is really the dynamic nature of the leader. When I see a leader that I really think has their act together, I just want to kind of like support them and push them forward and get them to do their best. So I'm more about people than I am about the issue. But some of those issues also are ones that I pay attention to.
David, this was a really insightful, wonderful conversation. So thank you for joining me, and thank you for all you do.
Olga, thanks for having me. I enjoyed the conversation as well.